When the bells stop ringing, the real service begins. In the deep shadows of Australia's most sacred, forgotten places, the silence is broken by whispers from the damned. They sought eternal rest, but found eternal rage. Every chipped altar, every cold pew holds a secret. We expose the 15 houses of God claimed by pure horror, the top 15 haunted churches. 1. St. John's Anglican Church, Reed. St. John's Anglican Church in Reed stands as a venerable monument, its sandstone walls softened by nearly 2 centuries of Canberra's high country sun and shadow. Built in 1845, long before the capital existed, the churchyard and its surrounding grounds carry the deep patina of an unsettled past. It is not the grand architecture that unsettles visitors, but the profound, unnatural coldness that radiates from the historic cemetery, a spiritual chill that defies the season and lingers heaviest around the oldest graves, a feeling often dismissed by the living, yet impossible to ignore by those who work there late. The church's earliest registers are stained with accounts of hardship, infant mortality, brutal accidents, and the slow loneliness of colonial life. The most persistent legend concerns the small, wrought iron gate leading to the burial ground's eastern quadrant. Here lies the resting place of a young governess, whose death in the late 1800s remains ambiguously logged. Some records suggest fever, others hint at a more desperate ending. Her spirit, supposedly one of quiet, perpetual sorrow, is blamed for the distinct, heavy scent of withered lilies that occasionally saturates the air near the baptismal fonda. Even when all flowers within the sanctuary are fresh, clergy and maintenance staff often report specific, measurable phenomena within the structure. The church's original clock tower mechanism, meticulously restored, has a recurring problem. The heavy weights swing wildly during quiet hours, triggering the bell to toll exactly 3 times around 3:15 a.m., though no wind or seismic activity registers. More unnerving is the phenomenon inside the nave. Late-night cleaning crews have documented the faint, deliberate sound of the pipe organ being played. Not a melody, but a low, sustained chord that vibrates the wooden floorboards. When the sacristan investigates, the organ console is always found covered and locked, with the bellows depressurized, suggesting a music generated not by mechanism, but by residual, mournful energy. These occurrences culminate in the chilling experience of an intangible presence observed in the choir stalls. Those unfortunate enough to be working alone in the sanctuary after midnight speak of a dark shadow, roughly the shape of a seated figure, occupying the 3rd stall from the east, a spot always avoided by the current choir members. The figure never moves, possesses no discernible features, and simply watches. When acknowledged, the air drops precipitously, and a sensation of crushing, ancient sadness forces the observer to flee, leaving the oldest church in Canberra to its restless, documented dead. 2. St. Stephen's Church and Cemetery, Newtown. The chill that clings to the sandstone walls of St. Stephen's Church in Newtown is not just the dampness of the evening, but something far older, a residue of grief and forgotten violence. Situated on the bustling edge of Sydney, the churchyard is a crowded, uneven expanse of colonial-era tombs, pressed close together like mourners frozen mid-sigh. Local historians whisper of the ground's turbulent past. Long before the foundation stone was laid a site used for impromptu, brutal executions and unmarked paupers' graves dating back to the earliest settlements, the sanctity of the consecrated ground, it seems, never quite managed to suppress the anguish buried beneath. This troubled history manifests most acutely within the church's northern transept, an area perpetually shadowed even on the brightest days. The specific haunting attributed to St. Stephen's centers on the figure of a woman, perpetually dressed in the severe black fashion of the Victorian era. She is known only as the Sorrowful Widow, and her appearances are always heralded by a sudden, intense drop in temperature and the faint, unmistakable aroma of grave soil and withered lilies. She is a silent specter, glimpsed only in the periphery, standing briefly by the altar rail or hovering near the older marble plaques. Witnesses, usually late working vergers or security staff, report feeling a profound, crushing sadness overwhelm them when she is near, a visceral echo of unending heartbreak. One maintenance worker famously quit after encountering her in the vestry, claiming her eyes were not hollow, but filled with the stagnant, terrified water of deep sorrow. The most unnerving manifestation occurs late at night in the cemetery itself. If you stand near the oldest section after midnight, you might hear a rhythmic, heavy scratching sound emanating from below the earth. It is said to be the widow, still trying to dig her way to a loved one buried elsewhere, eternally trapped between the consecrated and the unquiet dead, relentlessly seeking a reunion she can never achieve within the cold, claustrophobic boundaries of St. Stephen's. 3. St. Mark's Anglican Church, Picton. The sandstone of St. Mark's Anglican Church holds the damp chill of the surrounding Picton graveyard, a palpable atmosphere that deepens immediately after sundown. The air here is not merely cold, it is expectant, heavy with the weight of unresolved piety. Built in 1847, the church stands as a solemn sentinel of the past, often cataloged by paranormal investigators as one of the most actively haunted religious sites in the region, a place where historic architecture seems to trap the emotions of the deceased. Local accounts consistently detail the recurring presence of a tall, imposing figure, often seen sweeping silently down the main aisle or standing rigidly near the pulpit. Researchers posit this is the lingering spirit of an early, stern rector, whose intense commitment to his parish was only amplified by death. His spectral duty involves ensuring perpetual order within the sanctuary he refused to abandon, his disapproval manifesting as a palpable pressure felt by those he deems intruders. Visitors and late-shift custodians frequently report a distinctive, localized chill originating near the altar, sometimes accompanied by the faint, muffled sound of an organ playing a dissonant hymn, even when the instrument is powered off and locked securely. More alarming are the reports of physical manifestations within the sacristy and vestry, doors slamming violently shut with no discernible draft, and the unsettling sensation of a cold, bony hand pressing firmly onto one's shoulder when standing alone in the central aisle. The entity seems actively hostile to modern intrusion, defending its sacred space with invasive, purposeful force. For those who have experienced St. Mark's after the setting of the sun, the conclusion is unavoidable. The sanctity of the church does nothing to deter its resident spirit. He remains the perpetual overseer, a demanding shadow whose silent, robed presence ensures that the service never truly ends. All Saints Anglican Church, Sutton Forest. The granite walls of All Saints Anglican Church in Sutton Forest stand defiant against the biting Highland winds. Consecrated in 1886, the Gothic revival structure is a testament to colonial endurance, yet a palpable, icy sorrow clings to the grounds. The air inside the ancient nave is always substantially colder than the surrounding southern Highlands landscape, a chilling drop in temperature that seems to emanate not from the stone itself, but from a deeper, historical wound embedded within the structure's foundation. The spectral reputation of All Saints traces back to its original architect, George Mansfield. Obsessed with achieving absolute perfection in his design, Mansfield reportedly worked through a brutal winter in 1885, refusing to leave the site until the structural work was complete. He was found collapsed and deceased within the unfinished crypt, just months before the church's completion. Local lore maintains that his spirit, tethered by his unfinished task and the cold tomb he unexpectedly occupied, never moved on. Instead, he remains a meticulous, frustrated phantom determined to oversee the eternal maintenance of his masterpiece. The hauntings attributed to Mansfield are not violent, but intensely territorial and procedural. Caretakers frequently report finding tools laid out precisely on the altar rail or stacked in geometric patterns in the vestry when they were left haphazardly hours before. Faint, rhythmic tapping sounds, like a hammer or chisel at work, are heard emanating from the rafters and the area surrounding the organ loft late at night, almost invariably accompanying a sudden, sharp drop in ambient temperature. Most unnerving are the sightings of a translucent, gray figure seen kneeling in the chancel, seemingly measuring the floor tiles with a phantom tape measure. If approached, the figure does not vanish but simply turns, presenting a face described by witnesses as intensely focused and profoundly resentful of any intrusion upon his eternal supervision. Perhaps the most documented phenomenon occurs during any attempt at major renovation. Any effort to alter the church's original 19th century fabric, even minor electrical upgrades, is met with relentless, targeted vandalism. Wires are inexplicably severed within sealed conduits. Fresh paint is mysteriously scraped down to the stone overnight, and newly repaired mortar is systematically gouged out. The persistent evidence suggests that Mansfield is not merely a residual imprint. He is an active, unforgiving custodian, ensuring that his cold perfection remains untouched, forever trapped within the rigid, cold architecture of All Saints Anglican Church. Five, St. Paul's Anglican Church, Kincumber. The sandstone walls of St. Paul's at Kincumber have stood sentinel since 1845, weathering time and tragedy, even in bright daylight. The surrounding graveyard, thick with colonial headstones, emits a profound sense of temporal isolation. This structure, one of the oldest churches on the Central Coast, is not merely a historical landmark, it is a convergence point for lingering sorrow. Legend ties the most persistent activity to the grave of Elizabeth, a young woman who, records suggest, died suddenly in the 1850s, far from her native England, overcome by the isolation of the new settlement, and buried without the rites she had requested. Parishioners and caretakers often report localized temperature drops severe enough to cause visible breath. Concentrated around the antique cedar pulpit and the adjacent vestry, the auditory phenomena are more disturbing. The unmistakable sound of faint, rhythmic weeping, often described as sounding too wet, is frequently heard late at night, seeming to emanate from the area directly above Elizabeth's burial plot, outside the northern wall. When investigators have attempted to record the sounds, EVP devices routinely capture a whispered, non-English phrase, believed to be the woman's desperate invocation in a long-forgotten dialect. The most unsettling manifestation is the recurring visual presence. A pale figure, dressed in the heavy, dark garments of the mid-19th century, is occasionally observed kneeling near the fourth row of pews during early morning services. She never interferes with the service, but witnesses report a crushing sense of despair and cold radiating from her silent form. As the sun fully crests the eastern wall, the figure simply absorbs back into the aging stone. St. Paul's remains a place of worship, but for those who understand its history, it functions more powerfully as a permanent monument to one soul's perpetual, unceasing grief. Six, St. Patrick's Catholic Church, Colebrook. The heavy, damp air of Colebrook settles deep into the stone foundations of St. Patrick's Catholic Church. It is a structure built not just of granite and timber, but of profound isolation. When the last service concludes and the oil lamps are extinguished, the silence inside is not peaceful, but pressurized, waiting. Visitors often report a pervasive chill that defies the season. Strongest near the altar, a cold that smells faintly of wood smoke and old incense, a scent that seems chemically bonded to the aging plaster walls. Local history holds a grim narrative concerning Father Thomas Vance, assigned to the parish in the late 1890s. Vance was known for his extreme asceticism and his crippling guilt over a moral failing prior to his ordination. one he believed disqualified him from true grace. The legend claims that rather than abandon his post, he chose penance in perpetuity, driven mad by the weight of his secret. One bitter winter morning, the sacristan found him kneeling rigidly before the crucifix, completely frozen solid, the polished stone floor beneath him strangely dry. His sudden, private death was logged officially as natural causes. But the subsequent phenomena suggest that his soul never received absolution. The haunting manifests less through traditional apparitions and more through auditory phenomena, consistent with the ritualistic life he refused to leave. On quiet nights, investigators frequently capture EVPs of faint, rattling chains, a sound reminiscent of an old, heavy censer swinging, though no such item is in use. More chilling are the reported instances of the shadow vestment. Parishioners tasked with cleaning have witnessed a tall, dark shadow moving rapidly from the confessional booth toward the sanctuary, mimicking the hurried, guilty pace of a priest late for Mass, always accompanied by the distinct sound of dragging heavy wool across the stone floor. The current clergy insists that the presence is benevolent, perhaps merely a lost soul seeking resolution or comfort. Yet, those who stay late consistently report the indelible feeling of being watched during private prayer. Judged by an uncompromising, self-inflicted severity, when you finally leave St. Patrick's, the profound cold rarely lifts immediately. It follows you home, a lingering chill that serves as a reminder of eternal, unforgiving penance. 7. Holy Trinity Anglican Church, Roebourne. The dust of the Pilbara settles thickly on Holy Trinity Anglican, staining the whitewashed limestone a permanent sepia. Consecrated in 1895, it stands as one of the oldest churches in continuous use in Western Australia. Yet its isolation has bred a profound, unsettling silence. The corrugated iron roof absorbs the brutal Roebourne sun, trapping the heat within the nave, turning the air viscous and difficult to breathe. Even at night, visitors often describe this oppressive atmosphere not as ambient heat, but as the concentrated, suffocating warmth of a dying fever. Local history dictates that the land itself is haunted by failure and despair, failed mining ventures, epidemic fevers, and the constant psychological toll of the frontier. The specific legend attached to Holy Trinity centers on a young curate, George Eames, who succumbed to typhoid in 1903. Due to the extreme heat and difficulty securing a proper coffin, his hasty burial beneath a thin, cracked slab near the vestry was perhaps less than reverent. It is said that Eames never received his full repose, bound instead to the structure he died defending, fueled by the slow, dry rage of his unfinished existence. The hauntings are subtle but consistent. On nights of intense atmospheric pressure, witnesses report hearing a faint, discordant wheeze emanating from the small pipe organ, the sound of someone struggling to play a hymn they cannot quite remember. More terrifying are the physical manifestations. The heavy oak door leading to the chancel is often found bolted from the inside, despite no entry point being available, and the distinct, metallic scent of antiseptic and wilted lilies clings to the air near the pulpit. Those who linger too long claim to feel a sudden, crushing weight on their chest, a desperate, breathless pressure mirroring the final moments of Eames's fever. The church remains open for services, its stone walls containing not the peace of God, but the enduring suffering of a forgotten man. To stand inside Holy Trinity is to be pressed against the dry, echoing tomb of the man who still guards the altar, waiting for a proper, cool grave that will never come. 8. St. David's Anglican Church, Elora. The air around St. David's Anglican Church in Elora holds a static chill, distinct from the typical Queensland heat. This historic sandstone edifice, consecrated in 1888, presents a picture of serene piety by day. But after sundown, shadows coalesce beneath the heavy Gothic arches, local lore whispers that the sanctity of the church grounds was irrevocably breached by a tragedy almost a century ago involving a young, deeply religious organist named Ilara, whose devotion curdled into despair after she was violently wronged. She was found dead in the choir loft, a victim of circumstance or perhaps of a darker, unknown malice that remains unsanctified by time. Ilara's grief and rage, it seems, were bound forever to the building's foundations. The primary manifestation of her lingering presence is auditory, though profoundly unnerving. Visitors and parishioners have reported hearing the distant, mournful strains of the church organ playing late at night, long after the electricity has been shut down and the doors secured. These spectral concerts are never a full hymn. They are broken, disjointed chords, often resolving into a low, weeping dissonance that seems to em and vibrate from the very stone walls. The chilling climax of the haunting occurs at the pulpit. During solitary midnight vigils, priests have occasionally witnessed the vestry door swinging slowly open, revealing an intense, freezing draft that carries with it the faint scent of dried lavender and old parchment. Most terrifyingly, on the anniversary of her death, the central heavy Bible on the lectern is often found open to the Book of Lamentations, its pages faintly damp, as if soaked with unseen tears. Those who have encountered Ilara's presence rarely speak of seeing a figure, only of feeling an overwhelming weight of sorrow pressing down upon them. A spiritual claustrophobia, St. David's remains a place of worship. Yet it is also a silent monument to a betrayal that time cannot heal. The music always stops suddenly, leaving behind an echoing silence that feels heavier, more menacing than any sound. A final, cold testament to a soul permanently trapped between salvation and revenge. St. Peter's Anglican Church, Wynnum. The air around St. Peter's Anglican Church in Wynnum carries the humid scent of Moreton Bay and the heavy quietude of old stone. Established early in the community's history, its foundations hold a rigid account of coastal duty and unwavering structure. After midnight, when the Brisbane suburbs fall utterly silent, an unnerving vigilance settles over the grounds. Security patrols and late-night custodians have long reported that the church is never truly empty, often feeling observed from the deeply shadowed narthex, where the temperature unaccountably drops regardless of the season. The primary account centers on Elias Vance, the sexton who served St. Peter's faithfully for 40 years until his untimely death in 1898. During a ferocious cyclonic event, Vance was reportedly attempting to secure the large bell in the tower to prevent catastrophic damage to the spire. He was caught in a slip near the narrow vestry stairwell, breaking his neck instantly in service to the building. While his dedication was absolute, those who followed believe his spirit never found peace, remaining bound to the maintenance duty he could not complete. The manifestations are explicitly tied to the older, closed-off areas of the church. Custodians frequently report the distinctive, anachronistic odor of paraffin and damp wool emanating from the bell tower access door, even when it is locked and sealed. More chillingly, the heavy cast bell itself, though deactivated and secured decades ago, has occasionally been heard tolling just once a deep, muffled clang detected precisely at 3:15 a.m. The estimated time of Vance's fatal fall, witnesses describe hearing faint, labored breathing accompanied by the distinct sound of heavy boots ascending the narrow, wooden staircase, halting abruptly just before the top landing. Those who work within St. Peter's warn newcomers never to touch or move the ancient coiled rope kept near the base of the tower. It is not an aggressive haunting, rather, it is a perpetual, tragic echo of duty. Elias Vance is simply trying to finish his work, ensuring the massive bronze bell is secured against a storm that ended over a century ago. An eternal, silent effort played out in the cold, dutiful corners of the Wynnum Church. 10. St. Mary's Church, Warwick. The colossal bulk of St. Mary's Church in Warwick hides a terrible secret of ruin. Though largely reconstructed after the devastating Great Fire of 1694, the scent of smoke seems perpetually trapped within the ancient porous sandstone. It is a monument built atop a catastrophe, a perpetual reminder of lives violently truncated. The massive Gothic structure feels less like a place of serene worship and more like a mausoleum for spirits who never found rest in the inferno, their silence strained against the weight of the new stone that entombs their final agonies. The fire did not just destroy the architecture, it fundamentally desecrated the interred. During the frantic, doomed efforts to save the structure, crypts were opened and tombs exposed to the searing heat. Legend suggests that a small number of victims, including one desperate verger trapped attempting to secure the vestry records, remain bound to the precise moment of their deaths. Their anguish is imprinted upon the very foundation of the structure. This verger, often described as a pale, flickering shape glimpsed in the peripheral vision, is the primary manifestation of the tragedy that nearly consumed the church's history. The most active areas are the low-ceilinged crypts beneath the main nave remnants that somehow survived the blast furnace above. Here, the temperature drops violently. Regardless of the season, maintenance staff have frequently reported the distinct sound of heavy, panicked footsteps echoing on the stone stairs when the church is locked and empty, always followed by the clattering noise of old scrolls or heavy books dropping onto the flagstones. This sound precisely mimics the verger's final, desperate attempt to save the archival history before the roof collapsed upon him. Yet the phenomenon is not limited to sound. Those who linger near the rebuilt vestry late at night sometimes catch a fleeting, secondary odor, not the usual faint, stale smoke of the historic building, but the intense, acrid smell of wet wood and sulfur, like a fire that has just been brutally extinguished. It leaves behind only the chilling, absolute certainty that someone is still searching the wreckage, utterly unable to realize that the flames died centuries ago. St. Matthew's Anglican Church, Windsor. The Hawkesbury air often clings heavy and damp to the ancient sandstone of St. Matthew's Anglican Church, a magnificent sentinel overlooking Windsor since the early colonial era. Designed by Francis Greenway, the towering structure possesses an internal stillness far more profound than mere silence. The temperature inside the nave is always several degrees colder than the exterior, an oppressive chill that seems to actively absorb sound and light, leaving visitors with the uneasy sense of trespass. The historical weight of St. Matthew's is etched not just in the foundation stones, but in the crowded graveyard, where rows of early settlers and infant children lie. The most enduring legend centers on the restless spirit of Eleanor Vance, a woman who succumbed to puerperal fever shortly after giving birth in 1832. Her grave marker, accidentally moved and replaced incorrectly during a landscaping effort in the 1950s, purportedly trapped her soul. Locals whisper that Eleanor is eternally tethered to the church structure, forever searching the aisles for her displaced, lost infant. Caretakers and late-night bell ringers consistently report inexplicable occurrences near the altar rail. The scent of withered lavender often floods the closed vestry when no flowers are present, and electrical systems frequently spike and fail without cause during the midnight hour. However, the most terrifying manifestation is the sound known simply as the weeping shadow. Between 2:00 and 3:00 a.m., a distinct, mournful humming is heard echoing from the locked bell tower, always accompanied by a dramatic, localized drop in temperature, sometimes so severe it leaves a visible skim of hoarfrost on the interior window glass. Security footage, when it operates correctly, occasionally captures a translucent, shawl-draped figure traversing the north aisle, moving without disturbing the settled dust motes. The persistent rumors of drafts and thermal anomalies fail to explain the paralyzing fear felt by those who witness the phenomenon. Eleanor's search is unending. The unnatural cold silence of St. Matthew's is not the peace of the divine, but the heavy, lingering oppression of a colonial sorrow, forever trapped between the high altar and the stone-cold earth. St. John's Anglican Cathedral, Parramatta. The air inside St. John's Anglican Cathedral in Parramatta never truly feels warm. Even on the brightest summer afternoons, it is a deep, palpable cold, clinging to the ancient sandstone walls, Australia's oldest church building, in continuous use. A repository not just of faith, but of accumulated sorrow. The shadows here are unusually dense, pooling beneath the soaring cedar ceiling, a consequence, perhaps, of the countless lives memorialized in its foundations, including those of the early governors, interred with the formality of empire, but without true peace. Local lore whispers of a persistent, residual energy centered around the nave and the graveyard stretching behind the chancel. The most detailed accounts concern the presence of a woman, often glimpsed late at night when the floodlights fail to penetrate the deepest corners of the interior. She is described not as spectral or transparent, but possessing a disturbing clarity, always dressed in the severe, dark gown of the early colonial era. Staff members who have worked the late shift speak of seeing her kneel silently in the front pews, only for her form to dissipate entirely when approached, leaving behind only the crisp, unmistakable scent of burning lavender and ozone. The specific haunting attributed to her relates to the stolen quiet of the sacristy. Custodians have repeatedly reported finding liturgical objects, chalices, linens, and prayer books rearranged meticulously on the main altar, sometimes smeared with what appears to be dried mud, despite the cathedral doors being secured and alarmed. This activity peaks during the month of August, coinciding with the anniversary of a great Parramatta flood, which tragically claimed many lives along the riverbank in the 1830s. On one particularly harrowing night, a security guard reviewing the internal CCTV footage witnessed the kneeling woman rise. She did not walk, but slid soundlessly toward the camera, her face obscured entirely by shadow, save for a single incandescent glint, the moisture of an unshed tear reflecting the lens. The recording cut out immediately, but the resulting deep chill that permeated the sacristy lasted for weeks, a signature of the dead who still demand reverence in the oldest house of stone. Christchurch, Geelong. The sandstone of Christchurch in Geelong stands sentinel against the persistent chill blowing off Corio Bay, a venerable structure whose foundation whispers of secrets interred deep within its consecrated ground. Though beautiful in its Gothic revival solemnity, the air around the 13th oldest church in Victoria possesses a profound, unnerving stillness, particularly after dusk when the streetlights cast long, spectral shadows across the graveyard. It is a place where history is not merely preserved, but actively struggles to escape. Local legend focuses intensely on the Reverend Gregory, a pastor who served the parish in the late 1800s, a man known for his rigid, uncompromising piety. He was said to have enforced a grim, almost fearful discipline among his congregation. The tale claims that his death was sudden, perhaps violent, occurring tragically within the vestry itself. Since his hasty burial in the churchyard, staff and visitors have reported a relentless, cold presence focused almost entirely within the main sanctuary and the adjoining administration areas, an entity seemingly tied irrevocably to its former spiritual domain. The manifestations are specific, unnervingly systematic. Maintenance workers frequently recount the distinct, sharp scent of lavender and old parchment overwhelming the musty air, often immediately preceding the sound of heavy boots pacing slowly up the central aisle when the building is locked and empty. Most chillingly, Several organists preparing for early services have witnessed the heavy, iron-bound sacristy door slamming shut with crushing force. Moments after a cold, authoritative hand is felt gripping their shoulder, a spectral reprimand for perceived carelessness or disrespect within the Lord's house. This oppressive watchfulness peaks late on Tuesday nights, the evening the Reverend Gregory historically reserved for his sternest sermons. Those brave enough to approach the stained glass windows at this hour report seeing a fleeting movement near the pulpit, a tall, dark figure receding rapidly into the shadows. The spirit of Reverend Gregory remains an unyielding custodian, eternally policing his silent, captive congregation. St. Paul's Anglican Church, Clunes. The air around St. Paul's Anglican Church in Clunes is always fractionally colder than the surrounding streetscape, particularly near the sandstone foundations, laid during the 1860s gold rush boom. Even during the height of summer, a specific oppressive humidity clings to the heavy wooden door, a stillness that many visitors mistake for deep reverence. It is, in fact, a pervasive sorrow, long settled into the mortar and slate. This environment of lingering cold is the principal evidence of the church's unseen resident. The church archives hold a sparse record of the unfortunate incident that locals whisper initiated the haunting. In 1891, the Reverend Elias Thorne, a man deeply respected for his charity work among the impoverished miners, vanished without a trace after a particularly harsh winter service. Rumors circulated immediately that Thorne had embezzled parish funds to pay off a desperate debt, leading to his self-exile or, more darkly, suicide within the vast, echoing church property. The official finding was simple disappearance, but the community, certain that Thorne had betrayed his vows, believed he had never truly left the consecrated ground he had allegedly defiled. The hauntings associated with Reverend Thorne are not aggressive, but profoundly intrusive. Custodians repeatedly report the distinct scent of old pipe tobacco, Thorne's known preference, lingering strongly near the altar before rapidly dissipating. More disturbing is the organ. On moonless nights, the colossal pipe organ, which was officially decommissioned and sealed 30 years ago, is sometimes heard playing faint, discordant hymns. The music always starts abruptly, sounding less like praise and more like a ragged, hopeless plea. Furthermore, a spectral, dim light has been seen pacing the choir loft when the church is locked. A light described by witnesses not as fire, but as a weak, sputtering gas lamp attempting to illuminate the shadows. The most chilling evidence occurs every November, marking the anniversary of Thorne's vanishing. The church register, kept securely under lock and key in the sacristy, is occasionally found open to the final 1891 entry. The blank space beneath Thorne's last signature, historically pristine, is often found smudged with dried, dark moisture, like diluted ink or old blood, as if the trapped presence was attempting to sign their name again, permanently fixing itself to the ledger of the living and the dead. St. Mary's Star of the Sea, West Melbourne. The stone edifice of St. Mary's Star of the Sea stands as a granite anchor in West Melbourne, but the cold within its walls is not merely architectural. It is a profound historical chill. Even on scorching summer days, a particular section near the apse retains a specific, almost viscous coldness, a sensory anchor to the tragedy believed to be trapped within its consecrated space. Those who work late in the sacristy often describe the air thickening, the ambient noise of the city outside suddenly muffled, replaced by the deep, heavy silence of the monumental structure itself. The persistent folklore centers on a sacristan, referred to only as the caretaker, who vanished abruptly in 1912. Though official records cite a transfer, generations of groundskeepers whisper that the aging man succumbed to a sudden heart attack alone in the vast darkness of the church. his remains overlooked for weeks in a utility closet until their decomposition forced discovery. The devotion he held for the physical building surpassed all human attachment. And it is this pathological stewardship that seems to bind him still. He never left his post, even in death. The manifestations are subtle but persistent. Focused purely on the upkeep of the church, witnesses report the faint metallic clang of keys turning in the lock of the priest's private study, always between midnight and 3 a.m. A heavier, more disturbing recurring phenomenon is the sound of furniture being dragged across the choir loft. The methodical repositioning of vestments or hymn books, an activity that ceases instantly if anyone attempts to ascend the stairs. Cleaners have frequently reported returning to freshly mopped floors, only to find them marred by small, deliberate trails of dust, as if someone in very worn shoes had conducted a silent, critical inspection of their work. The most unsettling encounters occur when alone inside the nave. People often feel a pressure on the back of the neck, an intense, critical gaze lingering just behind their shoulder. Those tasked with closing the massive doors sometimes hear a harsh, dry whisper echoing from the empty pews, a sound that is never distinct enough to form words, but conveys absolute, unforgiving disapproval. St. Mary's Star of the Sea may guide sailors home, but within its stone heart, one tormented soul remains forever dedicated to an eternal, judgmental vigilance. We've walked through 15 truly terrifying Australian sanctuaries tonight. Which story left the biggest chill? Tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Australia's haunted history, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation. See you there.